My first near-death experience was February 20th of 1999. And what happened for me, I had been getting ill at the place I was living. And at the time, I was actually living in a 16 by 16 shed out behind some people's house. And I didn't know it, but there was raw sewage coming up in the backyard, and I had caught hepatitis A from that. Um, so what happened was I had been sick for a while, um, and I knew that I was really super sick, and so I called the emergency crews to come, like, transport me to the hospital. Um, However, when they got there, I was out on the patio, and they took one look at me, and there was a bunch of emergency people there. And they took one look at me and they said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, I think I have hepatitis A. And they threw me a mask and they all jumped back about 3 or 4 feet. Like, "We don't want to be anywhere near you." And so I put the mask on. And about that time, my boyfriend of the time walked through the back gate, and he said he would take me to the hospital. So the emergency crews were all really relieved that they didn't have to deal with me in any close manner at all. Um, and at the time, I really didn't understand the severity of what was going on. And so my boyfriend then took me to county hospital. And when we walked in, it was a partly cloudy day. Like, the sun was out, there were a few clouds, and I remember I had my backpack with me, and as we were walking in, we went and we sat in the emergency room. And when the lady triaged me, I wasn't bad. I was, she kind of looked at me and said, "Okay, we'll go have a seat out in the lobby. We'll get to you basically when we get to you." Um, and as time went by, well, let me back up just a little bit. When I walked in there, I knew that the cowboy boots that I was wearing were contaminated from the backyard. So I threw those in a hazmat bin. And I mean, I just knew that they were deadly and I had to be rid of them, and I didn't want to track it into the hospital. So we're sitting there, and the more time that goes by, I'm feeling weaker and weaker. And at one point, I turned to my boyfriend and I just said to him, "I'm dying. I'm dying." And very soon after that, I ended up being put into a wheelchair because I could no longer stand. And what happened for me was it felt like I had a long, skinny black hand come up from my stomach, through my esophagus, come and grab my lips and pull everything down inside. I was self-imploding. Um, and at this point, my boyfriend goes like back through the doors to the ER. And as the doors were swinging, I could see the security guards grabbing him and leading him away. And so I was there all by myself at this point. And when they finally did call my name, all I could do was raise my finger up off of the wheelchair. I couldn't even say it's me. And so they wheeled me back. And as we went through the big doors, there was a big nurses station. And there was 3 nurses there. And the one in the middle had brunette hair. I remember that. And she was standing up on the phone, and she looks at me and she goes, "Are you Erin McAdam?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "It's phone for you. It's your daughter." And I had no clue how my daughter knew that I was in the hospital at that point in time. Um, we weren't living together. She was living with another family. And so I I said to her, "Hi." And she asked, "Mom, are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not, honey. I'm not." And I don't remember the end of the conversation, but I do remember the nurse wheeling me back into a room by myself. And the world started to get very, very quiet. And I asked for a pen and a little piece of paper, and it was a red pen, and I was going to try to write my will because I knew I was dying. I didn't have anything to give anybody, but yeah, I was trying. And when I was in that room, excuse me, on that bed, I could have heard a pin drop down at the end of the hallway. And at that point in time, my hearing was not very good, but it felt like my world was shrinking to the head of a pin. And then they brought me out into the main room where the nurse was, and it was a male nurse. Um, and he tried to get my blood, and it clumped out like cottage cheese. And he couldn't even get enough to put into a centrifuge to spin it to see what my blood counts were. And as I'm looking at him and he's doing this, getting blood from my arm, I remember that world shrinking down and closing up. And the next thing I knew, I was in the presence of this bright white light. And I think about it as a million candle watt power, like a camping lantern, just like turned boy max. And I was marveling at the fact that when I got into the presence of this light, I felt no more pain. And it, to me, I describe it as landing in pink cotton candy, because to me it was so sweet. And I landed softly, and I just felt so enveloped with love and sweetness and tenderness that, gosh, here 27 and a half years later, it still like just really moves me. At that point in time, I was, mentally sick, spiritually sick, and physically sick. And the next thing I remember is I'm laying down on my back, and this big voice just boomed through every cell in my body. It's not your time. And I was a little taken aback by that. And I was like, what do you mean it's not my time? No, I worked really hard to get here, don't you know? And once again, I had this, it was a really loving sounding voice, but it was a really deep one, reverberated through my body. And it was like, it's not your time. You have more left to do. And once again, I got really angry, and it was like, no, you don't understand. I tried really hard to get here. I tried to kill myself 8 times, and it didn't work, right? But now I'm here. Let me stay, please. And the last thing I remember was, it's not your time. You have more left to do. And the next thing I know, I'm looking up at the face of this male nurse, and I was really mad. And he looks down at me and he goes, you guys always come back all pissed off. I was like, well, no kidding. I didn't want to be here, But that feeling from being on the other side was amazing. I mean, it was like, why did they have to send me back here, on the physical plane where it's so hard and there's so much chaos going on. And when I looked at the nurse and he said, you guys always come back all pissed off, I had so much rage at this nurse, like, how dare you, right? And I thought, he must experience this with other people as well, not just me. And so he went on his way, and what they had done was, I had total organ failure, so all my organs had shut off. So they catheterized me and were able to drain off the uric acid enough that my organs then started working again. So that is what brought me back. And what the nurse did was, he went down to the bottom of the bed near where my feet were, and he said, oh, you've just got the mopes. You're going to be fine. And that really made me angry, because mopes, I mean, at this point, I had numbed myself with drugs and alcohol. And the mopes were from heroin addicts, don't you know? And I'd never done heroin. So I was very offended at that, which was just, yeah, I thought, as I look back at it now, it's really silly, but it was just that one thing, I think, that really helped motivate me, along with these other little factors, to do something other than just lay in that bed and die. So he eventually left the room. And after what he said to me, I thought, well, I don't want to be here any longer. So I grabbed my little vest that I had and put my cowboy hat on, because I wore a cowboy hat back then. And I felt very indignant. And I said, well, I'll show them, right? So I walk myself out of the hospital, and it's pouring rain. So I have no shoes, and I only have a little vest on. So I walk down the walkway to the road where Alhambra Avenue is. And I went and I sat at the bus stop. And I questioned myself for hours. Did that really happen? Did I really have this experience? And the questioning of myself goes back to being told what I thought and what I believed in a very controlling relationship, a very violent relationship. So I didn't believe my own thoughts anymore. And it took me a while to realize that really did happen. And when I realized that, I took back part of my power. And I thought, okay, I can do this thing, life. We'll give it a go. And so at this point, it was nighttime by this time. So I walked over to where there was a payphone. And at this point, I could barely speak, I could barely walk, and I shook like a leaf. And so I walked over to this payphone, and I pulled out my little address book. And I didn't have any money, and I didn't know really what to do from there. And right at that moment in time, a brown Camaro pulled in to the driveway. A man got out, walked over to the payphone, and he goes, "Do you need to make a call?" And I was like, uh-huh. So he puts in the money for the payphone, and I couldn't dial it because I was shook so bad. So he goes, "Who are you trying to call?" So I said, "My daughter," and I pointed out the number, and he pushed it in on the phone, and then he turned around and he walked back to his car, and he never said another thing to me. And I was stunned. And he got in and he left. And so I got a hold of my daughter, and she's like, "Well, what do you need, Mom?" And I told her, I said, I don't know what to do, honey. Tell me what to do. And that was all I could say. And I just kept repeating that. And after a minute or so, she finally went, oh, hold on. Just hold on. So she went and she set up with the people she was living with, that they were going to bring some clothes to me and pick me up. But she got back on the phone and she's, "Mom, go to the Mirror Inn, and we'll meet you there." And in my head, all I could think of was, that's a mile and a half down the road. How am I going to get there? It's pitch black. The roads in Martinez at that point in time would backfill with 6 to 8 inches of water on the streets because the drainage was poor. So I said, okay, and I hung up the phone and I just started putting one foot in front of the other. And in my mind, all I could think of was one more step, as the socks were flopping off the front of my feet in the water. And so I finally made it to the Mirror Inn, and I waited about an hour, and they came and picked me up and brought clothes for me. And it was quite a journey from there. I ended up curled up outside of my dad's house a day later. It was pretty weird. There's a long tail in there, but I don't really want to go into that. Suffice it to say, I ended up at point A and point B, and but I was curled up outside my dad's house, outside the back gate, and my dad and I really didn't have a relationship at that point in time. Um, when I grew when I grew up, he was a brutal man. And at a certain point in time, when I was 15 years old, my mom took me and moved away when he was gone hunting with another woman for the weekend. And so after that, he really didn't have anything to do with me. But it was, like I said, it was a really brutal upbringing in my home, a lot of violence. And yeah, he tried to kill my mom 3 times. It was hard. It was really hard. Um, anyway, I was curled up outside his back gate, and he was gone with a wife, girlfriend, whatever. And I had felt the ground shaking, and it woke me up, and that scared me enough to go inside his back gate. And then I went around into his garage, and he had one of those white plastic sinks, and he had dirty towels under that. And it was February 20th, 1999. And all I could think to do was go curl up under those towels under the sink there. And so that's how I spent that first night there. And I remember I was on the phone with my sister the next day, and because he had a phone in his garage. And I remember saying something to her about, if I'm going to live, it's going to be like crossing a stream for me. And every time I take a step, I have to trust that there will be a rock under my feet, because I can't see any other way across this stream. Otherwise, I'm going to drown. And I didn't understand how prophetic that was going to be, because I did end up getting clean and sober. And that February 20th, 1999 is my sobriety date. And I ended up doing the 12 steps of, AA. And I didn't really understand how those rocks or those steps were going to be that led me across to the other side of a healthy life. But they were there. So long as I did the work to get there, But when my sister told my dad and his girlfriend that I would be there waiting, and my dad didn't want anything to do with me, so his girlfriend put me in her car and took me to a hotel and put me up for the night there. And then they took me to another hospital, and then they transferred me to the mental ward of County Hospital, because I was so far gone. Yeah, it was quite the journey there, but it didn't end there. I was checked in on a 5150 to the mental hospital, the psych ward, I guess they call that. And a 5150 is where they put you on a 3-day hold. And at that point, I felt suicidal, homicidal, all the things, because I had been numbing my emotions for so long. And I didn't know how to live life. Then they so kindly extended my stay to a 5250, which was like a 14-day hold. And that was because I was acting out. They didn't tell me that I couldn't have bacon with breakfast because it was a fat and it would harm my liver even further, because my body was so decompensated. It was so ill. So yeah, they kept me for a while. And when they figured that out, they finally released me. And my dad's girlfriend then took me to a medical rehab facility, where I spent 36 days of a 28-day program. And yeah, I was the kid that was throwing the chairs and wasn't going to they were taking bets on whether I would be able to stay sober. And when I heard that in my brain, it was like, okay, watch me now. So in my sobriety, I have never relapsed, and that's not a story a lot of people can tell. Some people can tell that, but yeah, for whatever reason, it took me dying to become as willing as only the dying can be to grab onto sobriety. Yeah, so I spent the 36 days there and went to a transitional living house. And also at that time, I was going to outpatient therapy, intensive outpatient therapy, where I went for 8 months to it was called L'Chaim, and it was a psychological services rehabilitation program. Because at that point in time, I shook like a leaf. I stuttered really bad. I couldn't remember how to read any longer. So it was a slow process of rehabilitation. And during this time, well, the first year, my dad would not have anything to do with me. And so when I had a year sober, he had like a party to welcome me back into the family. He was still the same. He had mellowed a little bit, but I was lucky enough. He paid for my treatment. He paid for me to get sober and to, live in the transitional living community and everything. And I think he became willing to do that because his own brother had taken his life days before that, like 10 days before that. So I think that was a catalyst for my dad to wake up to say, oh, family is important. Yeah, that suicide thing runs in my family. My uncle did that. His son did that. Yeah, and it was pretty awful. And I did have a guy that I dated once who ended up being successful at suicide. And I felt that pain of, oh my God, I can never try that again, because now I felt what it did to the surviving family and everybody else who had anything to do with that person. And I could never knowingly cause that pain to anybody else. Yeah. It's a long way away now doing that. So anyway, at a certain point, I ended up taking my dad to his healer in San Rafael. Excuse me. And my dad was also seeing me get treated. And it was one of the first times that I had seen this gentleman. And I'm laying on his table, and he puts his hands underneath my shoulders. And my eyes flew open. And he looked down at me and he goes, "You could feel that, couldn't you?" Because when he did that, I could feel the electrical current run down my body. And I said, "Yes, I could. How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I saw the color run through your body." And that just really like set off this, like I said, electrical current through me that I had experienced earlier in my life, but now it was coming back full force. And so he said, "Well, let's talk when we get out from here." And I was like, okay. So as I met him out at his desk, and he looked at me and he goes, "What is it that you want more in your life than anything else?" And I responded to him, "Well, to help people." And he smiled and he goes, "That's what I thought. You're pure of heart." He goes, "I would like you to apprentice with me." And I was pretty much blown away by that. And I was like, I would love to do that. So I was his 13th apprentice. and I apprenticed with him for a few years. And it was actually a reawakening of something that I had done since a child. I've been a healer since a child, but pushed that down with a lot of everything else that I was going through. And so I've been healing people since then. And then well, the world shut down, right, in 2020. And I've been sick most of my life with various different things. And in September of 2020, I finally found a doctor to correctly diagnose me, and he diagnosed me with Lyme disease and some other infections along with that. So I had had undiagnosed Lyme disease for over 50 years. So that takes a toll. And so he started me on this protocol of antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, anti-parasitics, and everything. And that ended up getting me very, very, very sick. And my daughter ended up staying with me because she was recuperating from a surgery. And I had been in my bed all day, unable to move. And she kept saying, Mom, call the ambulance. Let me call the ambulance. And I'm like, no, I'll be fine. So I did finally get up and was trying to get to the bathroom, and I collapsed and a bunch of things fell on top of me. Yeah. Sometimes it takes like being hit by something for me to go, oh yeah, there's a problem here. And so I said to her, okay, fine, call the ambulance. So they came, and as they were wheeling, they put me on the gurney, and as they were wheeling me down my walkway, my daughter looked at me and she was crying, and she goes, Mom, you can't leave me now. We just started our friendship. We just started our relationship again. Because my ex-husband set me up and had my kids taken away when they were 9 and 11. He was a vicious, yeah, he was a vicious guy. I married somebody like my dad, only worse. So she was behind me telling me that, and I was like, I just want to go. I just want to like go back to that place I loved so much. And so they put me in the ambulance, and I can remember the EMT trying to start a line, and they couldn't. And I just looked at him and I said, just let it go. I don't know. Stop trying to poke me. You're not going to get it. And I know. So he said, okay. And so we started to the hospital, and I can remember separating from my body and just floating above it in the ambulance, just kind of watching everything go by. And, you know, it was like I felt no pain again. I was in the place that I knew. And I was happy there. Then we get to the hospital, and they open the doors, and as soon as they pull the gurney out, the wheels hit the ground, and I went right back in my body again. And I was like, no, not again. No, no. So that was my NDE number 2. And let me get a drink here. After that NDE, well, they took me into the ER, and they treated me, and they released me. At that point, I was on IV antibiotics, and yeah. So a few days later, I actually ended up being admitted to the hospital for 10 days because my body crashed all over again. But when I was released from there, my psychic abilities started expanding. And I ended up taking mediumship courses, local and online, at the Arthur Findlay Spiritual College in Stansted, England. And I did a lot of a lot of trance work, a lot of mediumship work, remote viewing, all these other things to facilitate an expanded consciousness. And that I was so happy, on the spiritual journey. And then my daughter moved in with me permanently. Along the way, I had done an intervention for her, and she had her problems. And along the way, also, I became very allergic. I have severe fragrance allergies. I have something called mast cell activation syndrome and multiple chemical sensitivities. And fragrances, I can end up in anaphylaxis and end up in the ER in a heartbeat. So that, I think, came along with opening up my mediumship, because I became hypersensitive to everything. And one day I walked in my house and there was a white thing sitting on my chair, and I thought it was a pillow. And I picked it up, and it was actually a piece of clothing that my daughter had got at a store, and I didn't realize it. And I picked it up, and it was full of fragrance, and it hit me, and it was all I could do to sit down. And as soon as I sat down, my consciousness went up into this place where I was balancing on a razor's edge at the top of a mountain. And I was balancing on there, really wanting to dive off back to the other side. But in my head, I'm hearing my daughter, "Mom, you can't do this to me. You can't leave me again." And so everything pulled back, and I'm back in my body again. And it was just like, oh my God, I'm back here again. and I laugh, because it's, at a certain point, I have to have a sense of humor about it. Because I do know that I have a greater purpose here. And my greater purpose is to be that of a healer. And about a year and a half ago, my daughter actually helped me. This is my office here, my healing space. So I went back into business. I opened up shop. And this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Healing people. And I do channel a being from the other side. And they help me with when I heal people. And what I do is, it may sound kind of weird, but I have the ability to pull my consciousness from my body and dive into other people's bodies and go through their body and do what I can to help facilitate ease and flow within their bodies. And I have done this with my own body and have had several spontaneous self-healings, which were pretty crazy. So that is what I do today. Yeah, so along the way, I've also experienced a lot of out-of-body experiences, where, and I realize this has gone on for many, many, many years, where I could be doing something at any point in time, and all of a sudden something will start swirling in front of me, and I'm gone. I'm taken somewhere. Sometimes I remember. Sometimes I'll go. I've been flying with my mom, who's on the other side now. And I've also had something called an SDE, I don't know if you've heard of them. It's a shared death experience. Um, the shared death experience that I had was one of my friends in the program had cancer for the third time, and I had gone and visited him in the hospital a few days before. And this was a Monday night, and it was like a little bit after 9 o'clock. And my husband at the time was in brushing his teeth, and all of a sudden I felt a cool wind pass through my body. And as I'm thinking about it now, it felt like the deep voice from the other side when I went there, but it blew through my body, and I instantly knew who it was. It was like, oh my God, Ricky just came and said goodbye. And I started bawling. And I looked at the clock, and it was 9:13. And my husband comes out and he goes, what's the matter with you? And I said, Rick just died. And he goes, how do you know that? And I said, I know. I just know he just died. And he went off, and he didn't believe me. And that's okay. It didn't matter to me. But when we went to his celebration of life, his son got up and was telling the story about how when his dad died, the clock on his wall stopped at 9:13. And it was just this verification that, again, okay, I know, because I always look at clocks to see what's happening at what time, and the synchronicities of 222, 333, 444, 111. So I went and I told his son about that experience, was able to let him know, your dad's talked to me from the other side, and he's good where he's at. Um, and that's an experience that I really hold near and dear to my heart. He's actually one of my spirit guides on the other side now. And that's really cool. He's one of my protectors. Since he was a cop in real life, he's protecting me. And I do have women's ceremony in my little office here. We're very, very intimate. I'll say that. we can fit about 5 women in here, and we do Native American singing, and we also do journeying. So that is, yeah, on a regular basis I do journeying, and that's always lovely to go. Yeah, we go talk to Grandmother Moon, and it's just a beautiful thing to be able to share this with other women here, and it means a lot. Yeah. And I am writing a book. Actually, I've got a couple different ones going, because I've not only experienced near-death experiences, but I'm also a UFO/UAP/NHI experiencer. And I've had those experiences since I've been a child as well. And I don't know how concurrent that runs with being a healer and having those experiences with someone from the other dimensions. So yeah. So some of my and I'm also a regressionist too for abductees. So yeah. I do a lot of things. I help people with pain. I help them with emotional problems. I help them with past life issues, and also abduction regression. So that's kind of my deal, yeah. And my website is erinmcadamhealer.com. And if they want to write to me, it's erinmcadamhealer@gmail.com. Yeah. One of the things that's really happening now is we're in this time of chaos, right? And it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better, but it will get better. It will get better. Thank goodness. Yes, yes. Go out, compliment, have some love for somebody else. Why make life hard? It's already hard enough. Thank you. And I will be at the IONS. Okay, I will be at the IONS conference up in Bellevue. I will be a volunteer healer on Friday morning. Great. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, fabulous. Thank you.